Hi, and welcome to this artist briefing session. Usually, I'd be able to do these in a kind of open forum with questions and answers at the end, but I'm off on annual leave for a couple of weeks. So I've recorded this, but I'm more than happy for your event partners to compile any questions and send those over to me. And I'm happy to kind of deal with any of those requests on a one-to-one. But just to give you an overview of a few bits of logistical advice and also kind of practical advice when it comes to working with your sculpture. And then once your sculpture has been painted, how to varnish it. I'm just going to go through a few bits of information, kind of top tips, advice, guidance and support. Hopefully these will be supported by printed materials that your event partner or your project coordinator will have provided you. But if there is anything else in addition, I'm more than happy to respond to queries on a one-to-one basis. But here's just a quick overview. So your sculpture, when your sculpture arrives, when you start working on it in your painting space or when it's delivered to your home studio, the first thing that I would always suggest any artist doing is obviously unwrapping it fully and checking it all over top and bottom just for any damage or any kind of blemishes or anything that might have happened during transportation or just as part of the kind of general fabrication process. It's quite normal for there to be kind of small little blemishes or kind of little snags or little bumpy bits because obviously every single one is handmade or hand finished. So it may be that there is kind of some rough areas or like I said, little nodules or things like that. And that's absolutely normal. And that can either be smoothed over or kind of tidied up with a bit of light sandpaper, something like wet and dry or just some fine grade sandpaper like this. If there's any dirty patches, any scuffs or any kind of further blemishes, again, most of those can either be dusted off lightly with some sandpaper or wiped off with some kind of general detergent or cleaning product. We often recommend giving the sculpture a wipe over with something like a sugar soap or just a basic detergent, mild detergent. And that's because although the sculptures are they're made of fiberglass and then they're coated with a gel coat and then they're primed and ready to go. So they should be ready to receive whatever paint or medium that you're putting onto the sculpture straight away. But what can happen in the warehouses during transportation when they're being wrapped is that you can have kind of scuffs and dirty marks that have just come, or oils from people's hands where they've moved them around. And so sometimes it's just good practice to give it a clean down or to give it a fine sand down. But if you are sanding it, just make sure you give it a clean afterwards and make sure it's fully dried before you start applying any paint. Some of you might want to give it an extra prime, and you can absolutely do that if you're if it's going to be a light coloured sculpture, or you feel that it just, to clean it up, you just want to start with your own primer, then you can of course do that. You can use a spray primer, or you could just use a coat of good quality white emulsion, something that's a good brand like a Dulux or a Crown or Valspar or something like that. But these spray primers are pretty good, and this is the one that we use in our warehouse and for any of our kind of repairs and things like that. So once it's clean and it's ready, if there is any cracks, it could just be very, very fine cracks in the gel coat, which a bit of fine sanding can get rid of. If you do notice that there are any bigger chips or holes or cracks, then either contact the event partner that you're working with or contact us, and we're happy to give you a bit of guidance and support on ways that you can make kind of very small remedial repairs. Sometimes, you know, things do just get knocked or love tapped, as we call it, in transit, and sometimes just a tiny bit of filler or a bit of car body filler can be, or even a bit of super glue can just fix and seal tiny cracks or chips in the fiberglass, and mean that rather than having a whole new sculpture shipped to you or delivered to you, it can be repaired quite easily yourself. So so what that's kind of the basics for once your sculpture arrives. What I always suggest is keeping hold of any wrapping that it comes in, because it can be really useful when they come to be returned. Best practice for kind of deliveries and receiving deliveries, if you are having it moved or shipped, is to actually drill the sculpture into the base of the van, just with some kind of coach screws, some screws, or all of the sculptures, the large sculptures, will have lugs, what we call lugs. They're the kind of L bracket that comes out of the bottom of the sculpture. And by securing that using a washer and a screw to the base of the van that it's being collected in, or even screwing it to pallets, it stops it from knocking against other sculptures in the van, or it stops any kind of damage happening, because it's kind of fixed on its own base, in the same way that when they're out on the streets, they're fixed onto the plinths. So you might want to have a quick chat to have the logistics provider or whoever's moving your sculpture, if you're having it delivered, and maybe talk about that as a possibility. Sometimes wrapping with loads and loads of bubble wrap, it gives a false sense of kind of security to whoever's moving it around, and you can't see if any damage is happening. So we have had it in the past where sculptures have been put into vans too close to each other, and just the kind of motion of the movement of the van can kind of wobble the sculptures into each other, and they can kind of touch ears or scratch sides. So, and just be kind of mindful of that. If you are having to move the sculpture at all, those are just some of the questions that maybe you should be thinking about, or having conversations with whoever's coordinating your project. So moving on to kind of the painting side of things. Now, there are three main kind of mediums that we would recommend for painting your sculpture. I've already mentioned one of them in terms of the kind of white base, but we really do recommend emulsion as a really good option for you. And that, by that I mean kind of good quality emulsions like you would use to decorate walls. You can go into places like B&Q, Homebase, any kind of homeware paint providers, and you can normally mix. They normally offer the service where you can mix to whatever color that you're looking for. Some will even allow you to take in a swatch and they'll color scan that. So they're absolutely fantastic. They're really good for base coats. You get an incredible coverage because of the developments in paint and the fact that most people don't want to do multiple layers of coats. They really do cover so well. So you can often get away with just one or two coats if you're doing a kind of solid blocky colours. I know some of the artists who we work with regularly who only really use emulsions as their different colour palette choice. So it does give you a kind of quite a lot of flexibility, and it's very cost effective. Quite often you can get tester pots mixed, and they're a decent size for maybe a couple of quid, so you can get a whole range of colours for not a massive amount of outlay. The second paint is acrylic paint, which is really versatile. It dries relatively quickly. It leaves a great sheen. It's wipeable afterwards. The only downside is sometimes with some of the colours, you do have to build up coats. And if you put too many layers or your paint is too thick, it can sometimes look a bit lumpy. But just kind of working with it and kind of playing around, you'll be able to kind of get the feel of those materials. And if you are looking for kind of things to outline and kind of good kind of quality acrylic pens, then things like Posca do a fantastic range of acrylic-based marker pens, which come in lots of different nib varieties. And they're absolutely fantastic for doing that kind of detailing. I have to be honest and say I prefer kind of lining with a brush. That's just my preference, but they're great if you're looking for kind of to adding in lots of different details, or as I said, outlining other areas of paint that you've been working on, or kind of adding a bit of texture or depth or definition. They come in all sorts of different nib widths, as I've mentioned, from really fat markers to really thin fine liners. There are a couple, though, that we know of that have a reaction to the varnish that we recommend. And obviously, I'll go on to the varnish shortly. But the ones that we know can be a little bit volatile, and that is only with Posca, is the colours that are called blue, which is kind of a kind of cobalty, bright blue. It's literally the name on the marker pen is blue, and also slate grey. We don't know whether it's a batch issue, but we've had the problem kind of ongoing off and on over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, and it does just seem to be those two colours that Posca do. There is a way around it. If you have to use that colour, then you can create a barrier using a kind of matte or silk varnish, spray varnish. And we've got some information sheets where we provide 3 different examples of the kind of varnish that we recommend. Winsor & Newton Professional is one of those, which I've got here. But there are a couple of other variations, and that is on the data sheets that your event partner will have provided you. So the best way to work with that is, once you're completely finished with applying all of your colour and paint and markers, is just to spray following the directions on the can, so making sure that you're the right correct distance from the sculpture, and spray it very, very lightly. We always say is, don't get too close, don't pump it really fast, because it will just go on in a splodge and run. So you want to apply fine mists all over the sculpture, and maybe might even take 2 or 3 cans of the spray to get a kind of coverage, and then leave it for 12 to 24 hours before you apply the varnish. But I'm going to talk a lot more about varnish shortly. So going back to the different types of paints, the kind of third option is spray paint. So depending on your experience with that as a medium, then you can have varying degrees of kind of finish. What I would always say, a lot of our artists who work really regularly on Wild and Art projects have found that it is a way of being able to speed up their painting process by using spray paints as their kind of base layers, or for kind of masking big areas. So it is a great option, and there are some fantastic products on the market. Montana, Cobra, great products, and as I said, you know, depending on your skills and experience, it might be something that you want to kind of dabble with. The one kind of cautionary advice I would give you is, really do make sure that you're doing it in a well ventilated area, ideally outside. I made the mistake a few years ago of trying to spray something in my living room because it was absolutely pouring down with rain, and I had a kind of deadline that I was up against, and I have been finding pink dust for the last 2.5 years, because it gets everywhere. It travels, the kind of fibers go up in the air, and then they disperse. So kind of think about it. If you're working in a communal painting space with lots of other artists, it will travel, and it is, if they've got wet paint or wet varnish, it will travel and go onto their sculpture. So just be really mindful of where you're doing it, and obviously if you are doing it outside and it's very windy or gusty, it is going to travel. So yeah, just get maybe practice on a flat surface, or practice on a piece of card or wood or whatever before you start going on your sculpture. But yeah, more than happy to kind of answer any queries about any of those paint techniques or any of those materials at all over, if you have any particular questions. One of the things that comes up all the time is metallics. Now, there are great products out there on the market, from kind of pearlized acrylics to really amazingly vibrant and lustrous metallics. And there's loads of products that we've tried and different artists have tried. The downside of some of them is that a lot of the kind of products that have a really, really bright sheen will often tarnish once they've been varnished with our varnish, and that's often the ones that are kind of solvent based. I've seen some sculptures that looked absolutely amazing as soon as when they've been painted, but the varnish just seems to dull those. So the three that one of our regular artists, a lovely lady called Donna Newman, swears by. She uses Cobra metallic gold spray for kind of large areas on base coats. She uses Robertson's metallics, which I can send anybody the link to, or we can provide that in some kind of crib sheets. They do some amazing different colours. They're quite expensive. They're about £7 for a small pot, about 100 ml, but they do go a long way, and the colours really do hold under the varnish. So they're really, really bright and vibrant. They do a number of different shades of gold, but also bronzes and silvers and other kind of lusters. So they can be really really fantastic, and they don't seem to be affected by our varnish. She also uses a product called Sakura Pen Touch, who do a range of kind of acrylic marker pens in metallics, and again, those work really, really well and seem to be compatible with our varnish, so they're a great option. And any of those products, I'm more than happy to share links to suppliers. I think that's everything in terms of materials. I get asked an awful lot about 3D modifications and additions to sculptures. So I just thought I'd show this wee chap. So this one was just a kind of test run that I did with some gemstones being added on, as to whether the varnish would kind of work, and whether the grout when I'd applied them turned the gemstones really, really dirty, and it took an awful lot of cleaning and whatever to kind of buff those up. But then once the varnish was on, they kind of brought out the sparkle. So it is possible to embed a few things like this, but they have to be grouted on. Because obviously anything that is potentially pickable or snappable or will have additional health and safety issues does need to be run past your event coordinator, and I'm always happy to work with them, to support them, to come up with possible solutions or look at different materials. So for this particular sculpture, I set all of the gemstones into No More Nails. So I applied a really thick coat of No More Nails to sections of the sculpture. I had to work a section at a time, set the gems into that so they were kind of squished in. And then once everything had completely set, I then applied this dark grey grout to the sculpture. And then, as I said, I had to keep washing it down over and over and over to remove any of the excess and get the gems all cleaned up. And then I was able to apply the varnish on top. So there are some opportunities and options to kind of make some modifications, but anything that isn't painted should be brought to the attention of your art coordinator for your project and talked through with them to make sure that it isn't going to be in breach of any of the health and safety kind of procedures or protocols that we have on these trails, to make sure that there's no damage or harm to any of the general public when they're out on the streets. We've got years and years worth of experience of what works and what doesn't work, so please always ask, because between our teams, we've got so much kind of experience and advice that we're always more than happy to offer. I'm conscious that I'm kind of talking a lot, and I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about varnish and varnish application. So we have tried over the course of the last 12 years, lots of different products, and this is by far the best that we have come across. Now, this is a company called Urban Hygiene, and they produce this product, which is called Easy On. Now, it can come with lots of different labels because the companies sell the exact same product with lots of different labels on because it has lots of different functions. So it's often used in hospitals and wards as a way of sealing and making things really clean. It's used in a lot of local authority areas to kind of cover murals and to protect artworks in the public realm. It's also used to varnish sheds and walls and fences. So it's got lots of different applications. And normally our event partners will use this product, and it will come in either a blue, a green, or sometimes a buff coloured tin, but it always says the same kind of information on, and it comes in two parts, and that they often have different receptacles, but it will normally come in a big square tin, and then it will have either this or this with it. So the big tin is the resin, and the smaller tin is the cure. And this product doesn't work unless these two products are mixed in the exact right ratio. So it is a ratio of 5 parts resin to 1 part cure. So regardless, if you're using the whole tin will be enough to do 2 coats of nearly all of our large sculptures. So when you receive your sculpture, you will more than likely receive a set of 2 of these varnish products. If for any reason you don't, then obviously speak to your art coordinator because they may have a different system in place. But in most cases, you'll receive these 2 products. Now, most often, an artist will come to the end of painting their sculpture, they'll be completely finished, and they will leave their sculpture, I would suggest, for no less than 24 to 48 hours to make sure that all of your paint is completely dry. If you have added any texture to your paint at all, some artists have in the past added things like sand or additional kind of other elements. If you have done anything like that, you need to make sure that you give your sculpture extra time to dry. So it's completely dry before any varnish is added to it. Because what happens if any of the layers aren't completely bone dry is that you're going to get moisture trapped underneath. And then if there's any additional moisture in the atmosphere, it's going to force up underneath and try and break out through your varnish, which will either bubble or will crack. So obviously we don't want that to happen. So yeah, make sure your sculptures are completely dry, and that can be really challenging if you have set yourself a very small window for painting your sculpture. So if that is the case, I would always suggest that you leave at least a day before the varnish goes on. And a lot of this can be, a lot of the advice that I'm giving you will obviously be affected by all sorts of things, and the environment is one of the most one of the things that will affect your painting or your varnishing more than anything else. The best environment for you to be working in is kind of just an average room temperature. The paint will dry fastest, your varnish will dry fastest in that kind of steady environment, kind of 18 to 20 degrees in a kind of nice warm environment. If you're trying to work in a warehouse or a space that's really cold, it's going to massively affect your drying times, and it can take extra days even for things to dry. So we really do recommend that kind of nice warm environment to be working in. And when you start, so once you're ready to get varnishing, what you want to do is you want to open up your large tin, and this is the correct proportion as they arrive to you. So this is 5 parts resin, 350 ml to 1 part cure, which is 70 ml. Now, if you're ready to kind of work, you want to pull off your top. This pops up and unscrews. You want to pull out the safety cap, and then you want to add all of this product into here. Now, the other option is for you to measure out, if you're going to do it in 2 different days, 2 coats, you can measure out half of this product and half of this product, and it's the correct ratio still. But and that's often what I would do to make sure, if I haven't got the exact window of leaving 12 hours between the 2 coats, then I'll often mix up what I want, and then mix up the next batch when I need that, so I can make sure that I have that correct ratio. Once you do put the cure into the resin, whether you're pouring the whole lot into the tin or whether you're mixing it in a smaller kind of Tupperware tub or something, if you're mixing it in a separate receptacle, make sure that that is completely clean and there's no other products in there. And then if you've got it in the tin, put the lid back on and just keep rotating it for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. You want to make sure that those 2 products are fully mixed completely. The only issues that we ever have with this product are, unfortunately, user error and not kind of either mixing at the right proportion, not applying it at the right temperature, or not mixing it thoroughly enough. So what you want to avoid doing is kind of vigorously shaking it too much, because then you're just going to add loads of air bubbles to that product. So if you can just kind of gently rotate it, but make sure that you are, once it's in your, if you pour it out into a separate receptacle, just use your brush to kind of stir it and make sure that it is fully mixed. And then when it comes to applying it, we've got different artists that have different preferences for methods. Some prefer to use one of these kind of little wee sponge rollers on a roller stick, or some people prefer to use a brush. But what I would recommend is using a brush with light coloured bristles. And that's for 2 reasons, basically. One, if any of those bristles shred and get trapped in your varnish, they're not going to be as noticeable if you don't spot it and hoik it out. The other reason is if there is any bleeding or any kind of movement of your paint underneath that varnish layer, you're going to get an early warning system, because you're going to see the colour smearing on the end of your light coloured bristles. So what I would suggest doing is starting, once you've got everything all mixed up to the right ratio, you want to start at the top of your sculpture and work your way down. And I often kind of just kind of apply it. Don't have your brush so loaded that as soon as you put it on there, it all starts to run. But you want to have a good coat on there, and then you just want to work your way. I often work in a kind of crosshatch way, so that I'm making sure that I'm getting a smooth coverage all over, and then I'd work my way around all of the rims, going all the way around from top to bottom, and make sure that you're not forgetting things like any lugs or anything at the bottom. And just one thing that really helps the technicians when they come to install the sculptures is if you do end up getting any pooling in those in the kind of lugs at the bottom where your screws go through, if you can just make sure that you're elevating it so that that's dripping through rather than setting, because this sets like a resin at the end of it, and it is amazing. It's an amazing product because it really does give that sculpture a full coat, and the resistance to kind of, if anything is sprayed on it, if there's any graffiti or anything like that, it really does resist anything kind of sticking on it long term. So but if it's stuck in those wells, then obviously it creates a resin that you then have to break through to get the screw through. So if you can just keep an eye on that. And that's just made me think of something else that's a good tip. a lot of our regular artists, when they're working on sculptures, they might be working in kind of tight spaces or communal spaces, and light might be at a premium and they might have to kind of move the sculpture. So it's a really good idea if you can get hold of them to buy a set of casters, and you can take these on and off any sculptures as many times as you want, but it's a really nice way. If you get 4 heavy duty casters, you can literally just bob them through, screw them up with a nut, and then your sculpture is fully movable, and you can turn it, you can tilt it. There is nothing worse than being in a really a kind of space where you're having to sit really low. So you might want to think about elevating your sculpture. If you're not using casters, then put it up on a pallet, or put it up on some blocks, so that any paint that you're painting right down to the base will kind of triple under, and it won't get anything stuck. Yeah, there's just a couple of other kind of tips. But I think that is pretty much all I can think of at the moment. I think I've managed to cover that off in half an hour. So if there is any other questions, as I said, my contact email address is Annie, ANNIE, at wildinart.co.uk. But if you can send any of your kind of questions via your art coordinator, that's great, because then it stops me being contacted by 700 artists every month. But I'm always happy to try and help where I can. And if you're looking for more immediate support and advice, an absolute fantastic place for you to go, and I should have said this right at the very top of the presentation, is a fabulous artist that we work with regularly called Jill Busby, set up a kind of artist support group on Facebook a few years ago for artists who were regularly kind of working on wild and art sculptures, who might just want to kind of have a new network, people to talk to who were all working in the same way on these different sculptures and on our sculpture trails. So if you are looking for a community or a kind of other artist help group or support, or if you've got questions, if you're working on something and you just have a kind of off the cuff question that you want to ask about a particular material, has anybody done this? Has anybody used this product? Has anybody got an idea of why this is happening? It's a fantastic resource, and there are always artists on there using it. I absolutely love it. I'm one of the administrators on it. Jill kindly added me on because I've got loads of experience and kind of advice. But artists who are there to support each other, and everybody has experiences and kind of things that happen when they're during their painting, and it might just save you a little bit of extra stress. So it's on Facebook. It's just called Wild in Art Artist Support Group. You can search it up. It's really easy. If you need a link, I will share that with all of our event partners. All you need to do is kind of log into that link and request, and that request comes through to myself and the other administrators. Just say, you know, Annie suggested this, or you found out about it from a Wild and Art newsletter, or you're painting a new sculpture, and we'll kind of let you in, and then you'll be able to meet one of the most wonderful, supportive community of artists I've ever come across. So that's all from me, and yeah, good luck, enjoy it, have fun, and share your kind of images as you're taking it. Kind of, you know, keep sending your snapshots of what's happening. Obviously post to socials with kind of sneaky peeks or kind of updates on what you're going on, but obviously following any media or social media advice that you've been given by your event partner. But have an amazing time. These projects are really wonderful in terms of the fabulous support that they show to the charities. The sculptures sell and raise loads of money for really, really worthy causes. But more importantly than anything is the joy that they bring to the streets all the way across the country. The smiles that they put on people's faces are absolutely amazing. So enjoy being part of it. And thank you so much. Artists are at the absolute cornerstone of everything that we do, and it is my job to make sure that our artists are supported in the best possible way that they can be. And I love my job, and I love working with you all. So thank you, and speak to you soon.